like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. In spite of promises from the Prime Minister that the war on the motorist would end, it's alive and kicking. We were promised a delay on the ban of new petrol and diesel cars, but today's legislative legerdemain will effectively impose the ban as the government slipped through secondary legislation with minimal scrutiny. Now, apparently, that blighter Scobie has accidentally, in inverted commas, revealed the alleged royal racist in a Dutch translation of his attention-seeking new pamphlet, Endgame. But as this is surely yet another publicity scam, surely, hopefully, it's Endgame for Mr. Scobie. While the EU admits defeat after hopes of stealing half of London city workers in a post-Brexit world, the President of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, has called on the UK to come back under her control. I will be making a counter-offer to the former German Defence Minister. Plus, as I told the estimable Mr. Christie's last night, I'm a celebrity is eye-wateringly boring, especially because they insist on not giving more airtime to the only contestant that really matters, the great Nigel Farage. Tonight, however, apparently, Nigel will be taking centre stage in a Bush Tucker trial, whatever that may be. Here's a taster of what to expect.
Down he goes!
Shaking his head. It's tricky.
It's very hard to get down there.
Just can't get purchase on anything.
No.
Well, I suppose it's just about possible that Nigel's endurance and charisma may make it a little bit more watchable, but I'll be joined by a mystery former contestant this evening. Can you guess who it will be? State of the Nation starts now. Joined by a particularly clubbable panel this evening, the Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the handover of more Israeli hostages is currently underway at the Rafah border crossing in Egypt tonight. It marks the final day of a two-day extension of the truce in the Israel-Hamas war. Two of the hostages, both believed to be Russians, are now with IDF Special Forces inside Israeli territory. We're keeping an eye on events in the Middle East for you throughout the evening here on GB News. Here in the UK, Sir Keir Starmer says the government is to blame for record migration numbers as he promised to scrap laws that allows workers from overseas to be paid less than British workers. The Prime Minister and the Labour leader clashed during Prime Minister's questions today, with Sir Keir reminding MPs of the government's promise to reduce legal migration in 2019. Rishi Sunak conceded that immigration levels are too high, but insisted the numbers are coming down. Sir Elton John was in Parliament today talking about a new project which aims to end all new transmissions of HIV in England by 2030. He highlighted plans for HIV testing in A&E departments of hospitals to be increased in a bid to detect the virus in people who might not otherwise be tested. Experts say more than 4,000 people in England are believed to be living with the virus but don't know. Health and Social Care Secretary Victoria Atkins says it is an important step towards eradicating HIV.
We've seen from the scheme that has already rolled out across the highest prevalence areas that thousands of people can be helped with these early diagnoses, and then they can be given the support and the medical treatment they need to lead not just longer lives but also high quality lives.
Nottinghamshire City Council said today it is in severe financial distress and unable to deliver the right balanced budget. East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has more.
Nottingham City Council has today announced that it cannot balance its budget, and the Chief Financial Officer has issued a Section 114 notice effectively declaring bankruptcy. That means that the Labour-led authority from today can only spend money on statutory services. Those are things like education, for roads, for children's services. Now the council must meet within 21 days to discuss what measures they will be putting in place. The council has already spent a number of years struggling with its finances, and today it has really come to a head.
Will Hollis. And temperatures have plunged below freezing in some parts of Scotland and northern England tonight. Yorkshire has already seen wintry showers along the coast. That belt now moving inland, and the snow is continuing to fall in Scotland and Northumberland, with more on the way. The Met Office has issued another yellow weather warning. That is going to be in place from tomorrow until Friday. We're all expecting icy and freezing fog, but the Met Office says it is too early to predict a white Christmas. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Earlier this year, the Prime Minister made a promise to end the war on the motorist and reverse the then forthcoming ban on new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. Here's a reminder of what he said.
I'm announcing today that we're going to ease the transition to electric vehicles. You'll still be able to buy petrol and diesel cars and vans until 2035. Even after that, you'll still be able to buy and sell them second-hand.
And yet, the government has slipped through secondary legislation today that keeps the old policy broadly in place. The legislation known as the Zero Emissions Vehicle Mandate will force car companies to ensure that 80% of their sales are electric by 2030, and if they're not, they pay huge penalties. The government's own impact assessment says the policy will cost a total of £127 billion, equivalent to £4,700 per household. Any company that doesn't meet the threshold will face punitive fines of £15,000 per non-compliant car, which will hit, of course, the cheaper cars the most. Doesn't make much difference to a Rolls-Royce, but it does make big difference to a cheaper mass-produced car. And inevitably, manufacturers would pass the cost on to you, ladies and gentlemen, onto consumers. So this policy will bring a stealth tax on petrol cars. When the Prime Minister announced the delay to the ban in September, he also had this to say.
But I also think that, at least for now, it should be you, the consumer, that makes that choice, not government forcing you to do it. because the upfront cost still is high, especially for families struggling with the cost of living. Small businesses are worried about the practicalities. And we've got further to go to get the charging infrastructure truly nationwide.
But at least for now, it should be you who decides. But with this secondary legislation, the Prime Minister's aim is vitiated. This new policy is anti-consumer, anti-choice and anti-motorist, but it's part of a much broader unwillingness of the government to overturn the green ideology. Today, it's been announced that the National Grid has activated its fluffy, friendly-sounding demand flexibility service. But what it means is that we failed to provide sufficient energy supply to meet consumer demand owing to green policies. This evening, households will be paid not to use energy in order to keep Britain's lights on because there's a lack of wind and the cold weather boosts demand when supply isn't there. We've failed to use our own domestic energy supplies, so we have become increasingly reliant on unreliable wind power. And it's getting cold, so demand is rising. But there isn't enough wind, which means the grid can't meet that demand. Now, in a normal capitalist society, you therefore increase supply. And the Prime Minister, to his credit, has given new oil and gas contracts to the North Sea. But this will take time, and we haven't used, indeed the government decided not to use, the trillions of cubic feet of shale gas that are under our feet because the moratorium on fracking, which was lifted, was reimposed and would provide a more reliable source of energy. And the grid would not then fail to have the supply to match demand, wouldn't bribe you to switch things off if we were using our own resources. The Prime Minister's announcement in September seemed to hail a shift towards an intelligent and pragmatic, common-sense net zero. But we need to get back to that and reverse the secondary legislation, which, as it happens, can be done on Monday when it comes to the floor of the House as a remaining order, because it undermines his promise. And fundamentally, he needs to root out ideological green policies that risk making us cold and poor. Of course, I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com, but I'm delighted to be joined now by the motor journalist and former host of Top Gear, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, thank you very much for coming in. It's the incongruity, isn't it, that the Prime Minister says one thing, and then 2 months later, a statutory instrument goes through on a Wednesday morning, which nobody notices, which basically means what he said won't happen.
Well, he made that announcement about 2030 as an act of electioneering. You know that, Jacob. And
you're a cynic.
Oh, of course I'm a cynic.
Prime Minister, my goodness.
Come now. But the Z mandate is really important. And I was in Parliament today and I heard there were no votes whatsoever for it. But I was with a bunch of car makers yesterday with the SMT, and every one of them want this Z mandate because it gives them industrial policy certainty. And it's no good flip-flopping. And that announcement about 2030, they were up in arms. So we need investment in this country. And the impact report you mentioned, 147 billion, at the bottom of that report, and you know this, Jacob, it says the benefits are 166 billion. So there's 39 billion in credit, £1,400 per household.
Yes, but actually I've looked through that, and I've got the figures in front of me, because that's bogus. That includes a fuel cost benefit of 34 billion, which is the tax the government charges you. So that's a voluntary thing, and in the economy as a whole is circular, because it remains within the economy. It also includes nearly 80 billion on cars alone. There's another charge on vans. Hold on, I notice. But 80 billion, 79 billion and 83 million of non-traded carbon dioxide cost. This isn't a cost. This isn't a real cost. This is an invented charge that the government thinks is what you would need to do to offset the carbon. But you've got no obligation to offset the carbon. So you've got here 80 billion, another 23 billion on vans, 103, nearly 104 billion of fantasy costs that they're saying make it profitable.
But the fact remains is that investment will come into the UK. We had an announcement yesterday of 20 billion coming into the automotive sector from outside investments for green technology. And the oil and gas, these are sunset technologies. We need to look to the future, and we need to create renewables, sustainable, cheaper energy for everybody, and not monopolistic regimes who hike the price for their own benefit.
The argument I would make is if these electric vehicles are so good, they will win in the marketplace. They don't need the government to regulate and to ban. You see, if you create a false market, and you make cars that people want to buy disproportionately expensive, you add £15,000 to their cost, then people will buy less good things, and you create a poor market because you're not allowing the forces of competition to work.
But this is the biggest change for 100 years. These things don't happen just by market forces. You need to give them a nudge. We had the Clean Air Act in 1954. We'd all still be burning coal if we didn't do that.
But they did happen last time round by market forces, didn't they? You didn't need the government to ban the horse and cart. People wanted cars because they worked, they were better, and they were economically viable. And, of course, their cost fell as more and more were produced.
As will happen now. Now, if you... I mean, my electric car, I charge it up overnight on a low nighttime electricity tariff. It costs me £8 to do 300 miles. So the average family will save between £1,200 and £2,000 in fuel every year. The maintenance on my electric car, £40 a year, Jacob. So massive savings.
But the saving that you make on the fuel price is merely the tax. That if you were simply paying the cost of petrol, you could run 300 miles for £8.
We have to pay the tax.
Yes, but the tax is within the economy as a whole. So if you take the overall economy, whether you pay the tax or not, the country at large still has that amount of money. And it needs it. I mean, the government's got to get tax from somewhere. And so it will have to get tax simply from somewhere else. So there's no real saving. It's just a shift in where money is raised.
But it's a saving for households who will feel the difference.
It won't be, because they'll be taxed on something else instead.
Well, that's not my fault, is it?
No, but that's the point. That's the point. But that's a false market. And actually, it will come on cars, because governments have always liked taxing cars as long as they've been around.
And that's why you've got to have a conversation about how we change that and maybe get rid of fuel duty, get rid of vehicle excise duty, and start charging people by the mile.
But if you move to by the mile charging, people would stick with their petrol cars. That's why I say let the market decide.
Unless you give an incentive for zero-emission cars.
But I don't want to give an incentive. I want the market to decide rather than bogus charges on my constituents, making them cold and poor and unable to travel.
They will be warmer and they will be able to travel further for less. And their maintenance costs of these cars, one of the biggest drags on family incomes, motoring costs, fuel duty, repairs, MOTs.
The maintenance costs are low until the battery goes foot, and then the maintenance costs are catastrophic.
No, the batteries don't fail. There are cars.
Mine did. I had a Lexus, and a Lexus hybrid.
That was a hybrid.
And the battery just went, and it wouldn't move another
early
inch.
one. But all the data we have now, 400,000 miles on some of these electric cars.
All right, I've got to move on, unfortunately. Anyway, thank you, Quentin. Coming up, more drama from the blighter Scobie as he accidentally reveals the alleged royal racist. And don't forget, keep sending in your guesses of who our mystery guest, former I'm a Celebrity person will be. You'll find out who it is shortly.
Earlier.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing harmful green policies, and you've been sending in your views. Neil says, it's no surprise to me that Sunak has, on his word, on yet another green chokehold. Most of us have known for a very long time this administration is wedded to net zero lunacy. And Alan says the government's net zero policy and energy policy are a total disaster for every single person in the UK. Can someone please stop the madness? Well, I hope we can, because I don't want my electors to be cold and poor. Now, this blighter Scobie, with his tiresome new publication on the royal family, continues to get chins wagging across the country after controversy erupts from the Netherlands after claims that the Dutch translation of the book names the senior royal who supposedly speculated on the skin colour of the Duke and Duchesses of Sussex's son, Archie. The book has now been pulled from the shelves in Holland. The book publishers last night called the print an error and said it's currently being rectified. But was it really a slip-up? Or has pulping an edition in a small country just been a successful publicity stunt? Well, with me now is the Daily Express Royal Roundup host, Pandora Forsyth. Pandora.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. It's a fantastic publicity stunt, isn't it?
I have to say, when financial gain is brought into this, then obviously you do think publicity stunt. If it is, it's a fantastic publicity stunt, because we're speaking about it now and it's hit the headlines all day.
And I doubt the Dutch edition was going to sell the most copies. So if they've pulped the Dutch edition, that's a few books. I mean, they might as well have done the Swahili edition, which wouldn't have had many either.
If you just look on the internet right now, everyone's talking about it. But there is no smoke without fire. He did speak to 60 different sources within this book to get all of his information. And, of course, it's bringing around a story which the royal family really did want to put to bed. We heard about it first in Oprah 2021 with Meghan and Oprah. And it's bringing it about again. And this is really not something that they'll
But frankly, who cares? That people always ask about babies. I have a feeling that some disrespectful people may have wondered as whether a grandson of His Majesty had sort of ears of a particular shape. You know, people talk about what babies are going to look like. That doesn't make you earist, does it, if you speculate about people's ears?
Quite right. But whenever it's something to do with the royal family, as somebody who commentates on the royal family a lot, it doesn't matter quite what you say about them. There'll be an argument for and there'll be an argument against. But it just so happens that this topic is particularly sensitive. And, of course, this isn't going to help relations on either side of the Atlantic. There have been talks that the communication is getting better between Meghan and Harry and Charles and the whole family. But this, of course, is just going to throw in another spanner in the works just before Christmas.
Oh, well, this book must be designed to do that. I mean, you can't have 3 books written about your family and then be all lovey-dovey at Christmas, can you? You'd have to be a saint.
Well, also, another point I do want to make is Harry had his book. That was his opportunity to say whether he thought that there were these conversations going on. That was his opportunity. And they did say there was an unconscious bias. But did he go into detail in the book about this? No, he didn't. And he did have several interviews after that book got launched. So we're bringing about the same topic again and again. But unfortunately for them, I don't see it going away.
Is that because they haven't actually got anything new to say? So they're just regurgitating old stuff?
Well, as long as there aren't communications between both sides of the family, there won't be a lot of more stories coming in. You've just got sources. But as you said, this is old stories resurfacing.
But frankly, nobody would speak to the Sussexes about the weather, would they? Because it would be leaked to Scobie.
Well, this is another thing as well. It's Hollywood. And, of course, they want to become financially independent, which is why we've seen all the Netflix, the book deals, the Spotify deals, and God knows what else. But that's their issue. Now that they're not part of the royal family, they need to become a brand. And, of course, what do people want to hear about from them? Well, it's the royal family secrets, but they have, on the royal family side, never complain, never explain. That's always been their motto. So I don't know really what else they can release now.
And they're not going to tell any more secrets, are they? I mean, if you were the king, the next time you speak to your son, you're not going to tell him where you're going to be staying for Christmas. You're going to let him read it in the Court and Circular.
Which is so incredibly sad that it's now got to this point that we're at with them and their communications. But apparently communications have become better. So this has probably come at the worst time.
And has made it worse again.
Yeah.
But it also means that if they can't get the inside gossip on their own family to reveal it to the world, their income stream dries up.
It does.
And Scobie can't write another book, can he? Because this one's the regurgitation of the first one and of whatever Prince Harry's one was called.
Well, of course. Well, we don't know what happens in the future. What's going to be the next thing? What's going to be the next scandal? What's going to be the next bombshell? People have said about this book, you know, they were expecting huge bombshells in it. And actually, it's just going over stories we already knew. The difference is with this is that there's apparently 2 alleged royal family members. We thought there was only 1, but now apparently there's 2. But Omid wasn't in the room when these conversations happened. So this is all sources. Sources have told, part of the Meghan and Harry camp, the Sussex camp. But he has also, you know, had sources from the royal family household as well that he's gone to about this. So there is a bit of balance. But if you read the book, you can definitely see that he's a cheerleader for the Sussex camp.
Oh, yes, of course he is, and they pretend that they've never met him, and they then get in trouble in legal cases when it turns out that they have had certain conversations. So there's clearly a link between the two camps.
Yeah, he has said he's not friends with them, but I know they've had phone calls.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to say we've asked the great people of this country, Vox Day, what they think. We've gone to Sussex, actually, and do they think that the blighter Scobie was telling the truth? And the people have spoken.
Alford denies that this version was the intention, but I have my doubts.
We are so powerful, or have been powerful, with Elizabeth. Unfortunately, she's gone.
I somehow think it was done on purpose, that whoever translated it inserted a name. But who knows? Knowing the Dutch news, being Dutch, it's I don't know what to think of it.
I don't give a damn about them personally. Haven't a clue. Don't know whether it was done on purpose and don't really care.
It certainly would appear to me that they've done it to gain a bit of profit from the sale of the book.
With me now is my panel, Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Well, Tessa, this old Scobie fellow, does anyone care, really, about whether the royal family discussed what a baby would look like? Isn't this a normal family conversation?
Yeah, I think it is going over old ground. I feel like we've been there and done that with Oprah a couple of years ago. It's a bit like lockdown on a loop, isn't it? We're stuck in a Groundhog Day. What's interesting is that Harry, of course, dropped it totally. He didn't touch this allegation of racism in his own biography and in the Netflix Harry and Meghan series. So clearly both sides of the Atlantic want it to go away. And the one person building a brand here is Omid Scobie. And the more we talk about it, the more we're building his brand. I'm very suspicious of him, actually.
OK, so I mean, this is perfect, because it's very traditional, isn't it, Madeline, to blame evil advisers, and the evil adviser at the moment is this Scobie fellow.
I have no idea if he's an advisor or if he's an onlooker, how much information he really has. I mean, you mentioned earlier in your interview with Pandora, which was really interesting, about having 60 sources that they spoke to. We have no idea who these people are or how informed they are. And to be honest, I've rather switched off from the Sussexes for the last couple of years, and it's been, I think, quite good for the general sanity. Leave them to it, let them have their exile.
Interestingly, on Scobie, I mean, we know you referred to the High Court case where it was evidence that Meghan had briefed people who went on to speak to him. But this was a few years ago when they felt very isolated. Scobie wasn't getting the access he wanted on the royal rota. So, the two met in sort of perfect alliance. But since then, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have also moved on a bit. Harry's had his great unbuttoning, his moment, his public therapy, if you like. And we've seen very clearly a tactic away from spilling more beans. She's got a brand new agent. They've very strategically remained quiet. They're talking about new projects on the slate. They've got the rights to a book, Lady Meeting at a Lake, can't remember the name of it. And I don't think they'll want this. I think they probably wish that they'd never befriended Scobie in the first place. But the problem is you can't control.
You can't control once he's got his sources going, that he then keeps on writing, like Matt Hancock found with all his WhatsApps. Once you've confided in somebody, they can be all over the place.
Well, exactly, and I think they may have birthed a monster in Omid Scobie, perhaps. But it's kind of interesting that I haven't read the book, but I've read extracts of it, and from what I can make out, his key contention is the idea that the royal family is in crisis. It's this doomed institution. It's grappling in internal strife, and meanwhile the Sussexes are kind of moving on and thriving. And actually, from just purely my layman's perspective, things seem to be the exact opposite to that. It was said often that after the death of the late Queen, that that would be it for a lot of people. But actually, Charles, the King, does rather seem to have fitted into his role quite well. The next two generations of kings seem to be coming along nicely. It hasn't been the kind of doomsday that many people were.
That's a crucial point, isn't it? You're a historian. Think back over all the reigns. It's quite rare that the monarchy has appeared to be this popular, this connected to its people, and think of the Georgians and so on, and how popular they were. Think of the middle of the reign of Queen Victoria.
Hang on a minute. Now you're conflating one version of monarchy with another. We all
except it's a different type of monarchy.
It's a different type, which is premised on popularity. The Georgians didn't give two hoots what a great unwashed mass thought about them.
Oh, it's not true of George III.
George III, he loved going out and giving people sovereign.
He loved talking. Yes, that's right.
Hanging out with milkmaids and stuff.
He did all of that and went into taverns and things and gave people a guinea.
The great unwashed, got occasional access to the farmer king. But actually it didn't matter, and he hadn't traded his political power at that time for popularity, which was a deliberate move in the late 19th century into the 20th. And what you see now is, therefore, our royal family needing to reach out beyond their base. And their base, as you pointed out, with William and George, is very white, very male and very Protestant. So you've got to reach out beyond it. And while I'm a supporter of Charles, I think he's doing a fine job for an elderly gentleman, I do think there are going to be bumps in the road. There's a reason why he hasn't yet gone to any of his other 14 realms, because he knows he's on a bit of a sticky wicket in some of those. And I think perhaps it's no bad thing if the role of the British monarch is restrained just within these islands. Perhaps it's OK for Jamaica and Australia to shake him off.
Well, it's up to them, really. But I think that a lot of the debate around other countries divesting themselves from the monarchy has sometimes been a very skewed one. When Barbados got rid of the monarchy, they didn't have a referendum on it, and it was mostly done because it was on the promise of a vast fortune from China that would come into the coffers in Barbados, and yet somehow we barely talked about that. It was just purely a kind of anti-imperial thing.
That's right, they were bribed by the Chinese, weren't they?
Yeah. I think this could be overstated somewhat, and, new countries have joined the Commonwealth recently as well. So
but the Commonwealth mustn't be conflated with his role as the head of state in 14 realms. That's very separate.
But of course not really.
It is.
It's not really.
He goes to Kendal, which is part of the Commonwealth.
But if you go back to the beginning of the Commonwealth, when it was called the British Commonwealth, the one thing they had in common was the monarchy. It's pretty much still the only thing they've got in common is the monarchy. It's otherwise a fairly random organisation, isn't it, if you don't have the monarchy at its head?
And British heritage. Well, there's been a couple of countries, I think, who have just decided to join because they weren't.
That's right.
Mozambique, am I right? I can't remember.
I think Togo, and I can't remember.
But I don't think that you can conflate them in saying that. I think one of the mistakes, actually, the late Queen made was shoehorning Charles into the role as the head of the Commonwealth. And I do think there will be questions asked, particularly in an era where there's all conversations about reparations and so forth, and this is this direct, weak but nonetheless genetic link to an uncomfortable role that we had in places like the Caribbean. That's not necessarily Charles's fault, but I don't think the domestic machinations with Meghan walking off in a strop help in terms of mood music. People want to feel we're all included in this family.
And the trust that even if Scobie has made this all up from his previous book and it is just a cut and paste job, no one in the royal family is going to want to confide in the Sussexes for the time being, are they? Because they'll think it will appear in a newspaper, in a book, in due course.
Well, this is the problem. I mean, you wouldn't really... after what's happened thus far, and I appreciate the royal family is not like other families, but this is still an awful lot of secrets have been betrayed in a very public way. You would be wary about ever sharing anything again, or indeed even inviting people to family events.
I think, and suggests all the mood music around Charles's 75th birthday and the conversations and the phone calls, I think it's more likely there'll be a rapprochement between father and son than that the Tories win the next election.
Oh, well, that's changing subject enormously. No, I'm not going to get into those sorts of discussions. And one always wants families to get together and the Tories to win elections, so both of them are much to be desired.
Will they be sharing Quality Street?
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope that by Christmas it all gets much happier. Anyway, thank you to my panel. Coming up, my counter-proposal for Ursula von der Leyen after she suggested we rejoin the European Union. Plus, keep sending in your guesses for who our mystery I'm a Celebrity guest might be, which will be fascinating to
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour Sundays on GB News.
Give the police.
Welcome back. To quote the European Union's national anthem, back to it, he who never managed it to be a friend's friend should slink weeping from this union. And in this case, the union in question is, of course, the United Kingdom. The EU has admitted defeat after its own research has revealed it was entirely wrong to think it would steal a significant portion of city workers from post-Brexit Britain. The report noted that estimates suggesting 44% of the UK's largest financial services firms announcing plans to move some staff for operations. The number of jobs that have relocated out of London thus far is only 7,000, far below the initial estimates of 75,000. In spite of this, the former German Defence Minister, now President of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, has suggested the UK rejoins the EU. My alternative proposal is that the EU returns to its roots as a free trade arrangement, and rather than trying to woo back the UK, a fool's errand, it ought to focus on keeping its current members, many of whom are pretty fed up. Well, with me now is my panel, Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Madeline, why do you think Ursula von der Leyen even begins to suggest we should rejoin? It seems a pretty unlikely prospect.
I think she's, I don't know, Germans are not famed for their sense of humour, but I wondered if she might be trolling a bit. It's a good way to wind people up and set tongues wagging. But she did actually, in her interview, kind of admit that she used the phrase goofed up over Brexit. I wonder if this is an admission that perhaps things didn't go fantastically at their end either, that there's things that they might have done differently.
And if I were her, I'd be more worried about Holland and other countries potentially wanting a looser arrangement.
Yes, and actually I think in your proposal you talked about the EU going back to its roots as a free trade arrangement. I think a lot of its problems historically have come from a time where they attempt to overreach themselves, overextend themselves, and therefore alienate people. And that's what happened with Brexit. You know, if they had given David Cameron more concessions to take back, we might have had a different outcome altogether. Similarly, I think they are now in a rather overreaching phase. You know, as you know, the EU Parliament recently voted to remove the national veto from member states. I don't know if that will actually go ahead, but it tells you something about the mentality within the EU at the moment. You know, they're looking to consolidate, and that's not really where the voting publics are in Europe, I don't think.
Tessa, the EU is still remote from its voters, and Schengen, lots of countries have put on border controls, which they're not meant to do in Schengen. So the countries are sort of easing away from the power, the dictatorship of the centre.
Let's return to Ursula, who I'm rather fond of her. I'm going to make this gendered. I don't think a man would have said something like, oh, I tell my children that we goofed up there. I rather loved that she humanised it and that the EU took some degree of accountability, or at least admitted that they didn't play it in a very tactical way. I remember I was obsessed with Brexit. My family are in Scotland and Romania. I was sitting in London, and I just knew it was going to strain relations to the east and to the north, and predictably it has. And I will never forget Donald Tusk. At the time, he was head of the council. He's now big in Poland, isn't he? Prime Minister. He's done very well. But I remember him posturing on television the night before we went to vote, saying, we will not give any concessions if Britain just votes to stay in the EU. And I thought, you bloody fool.
I was delighted. I thought that pushed our vote up.
I bet you were.
So crass, because the way in which David Cameron clinched Scotland in the independence referendum was by love-bombing it. Cameron went up, Ed Miliband went up, Nick Clegg. I mean, a lot of people would say that's an off-putting triumvirate, but actually it worked.
Actually, up to a point, Lord Copper, I think the thing that maximised the nationalist vote was you won't be able to have the pound, the governor of the Bank of England saying your economy will be ruined. There was a lot of Project Fear in the Scottish campaign that I think was really quite damaging. And because they won, they thought that that was the way to run the European campaign, which worked hugely at their disadvantage.
There's a bit of both. There was also love bombing. A huge number of people in England got up when they saw the polls slide against them and went, we want to keep you, Scotland.
That is true.
And that was heard across the border. Nothing like a bit of flattery. And Tusk, he's a humorless sod, and I say that. he just totally goofed up. And Ursula, being, I think, more empathetic, understands that it's a two-way street. And Look, they're in a bit of an economic sticky wicket, aren't we all? Germany's their big economic engine, and it's not functioning at the moment. And I think probably the rules will need to be rewritten after the next election. You're big on manners. I mean, you must be so embarrassed with your Prime Minister at the moment being appallingly rude to the Greek PM, not seeing him, throwing his cards in the air, bad-mouthing him in Parliament.
But that's a different subject. That's a different topic. That's not on my list of topics for this evening. But nonetheless, it's odd to call for the UK to go back in, and the problems with the EU are pretty deep-seated. Wilder's election, they must be very worried about. They've got problems with Hungary. They are trying to introduce more controls. They're trying to penalise countries that don't go along with what they're told to do. And this leaves them in a bit of a muddle, I would have thought.
Well, I mean, this is where I would just, return to what you said in your intro. Why did the EU ever have to become an organisation that was taking this much control over national decisions? Why did they ever think that they could have the right to tell, for example, a country like Hungary or Poland, the number of migrants, the number of asylum seekers they must take according to EU diktat? That is just such worlds away from what it looked like in 1973 or 1975 or, in the 1950s. I'm not really sure how this transformation occurred. It certainly didn't have much in the way of democratic legitimacy. And I'm not sure that's where the people of Europe are. There are definitely some countries in Europe that have done well economically out of the EU, like in the Eastern Bloc. But I think that having the EU attempt to browbeat them on crucial issues like, the numbers of people that can come and live there, that will alienate a lot of the goodwill that has existed thus far.
Well, thank you very much to my panel. Coming up, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. If we have a metaphorical roll of drums, the moment I will be revealing our mystery former I'm a Celebrity contestant guest. That'll be very exciting.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, now it's time to turn our attention to I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. During its 20-plus year history, it's become part of British culture. The 3 weeks of the year where a peculiar sadistic pleasure is taken in watching the torture of celebrities of greater or lesser fame. I'd actually never watched it before this series, but as Nigel's on, our own Nigel, I thought I ought to try. I'm afraid I found it unutterably dreadful, dull, noisy, and boringly presented by Anton B, who I remember from children's books when I was little. I doubt it could be interesting, but with only 11 days until the final, could ITV turn this one round? Perhaps it could give Nigel Farage more airtime, to have a party political broadcast from, or something exciting like that. Our friend, who on Saturday drank blended goat and cow genitalia, has expressed his desire for more airtime. And I suggest that ITV gets its reported 1.5 million money's worth and do just that if they want any hope of turning this season round. His collected speeches on the European Union could be replayed and we'd all be on the edge of our seats. Now, throughout the programme, I've been asking you to guess who our mystery I'm a Celebrity guest is, and I'm delighted to introduce you to someone who in 2008 dined on jungle delicacies such as kangaroo gentles. She is Nicola McLean. Miss McLean, thank you so much for coming in. You're very welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You were very brave to do this. I mean, a lady like you going into the jungle and eating horrid things.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Before I was a page 3 girl, a glam model when I went in, but before I did glam modelling, I was in the army. I wanted to join the... I was in Army Cadets. I wanted to join the army, so it was quite easy for me.
So the discomfort of it didn't faze you particularly?
No, I loved the camping. Honestly, I've never slept so well as I did in the jungle. It was brilliant. I loved it.
And what was the worst bit about it in terms of the trials you had to do?
Oh, I didn't like any of the claustrophobic ones, like, you know, when they bury you alive in a coffin and they tell you not to call it a coffin. It's like it's a coffin. So I didn't like anything like that. Some of it was scary, but the actual camp life I loved.
And you know that you'll be safe, don't you? That the snakes they put in are not going to be cobras that will bite you. They're going to be snakes that aren't poisonous. They may be slithery and unpleasant, but...
I mean, it's hard to think that when you're there, I think. I mean, it'd be... You know, some people are really good at it, and people are getting better at the trials, I think. But back then, I definitely was terrified.
And the things you had to eat?
Yeah, I found the eating trial probably the easiest. Although it was disgusting, I felt like I was quite good at it. But yeah, I ate testicles and eyeballs and stuff like that. So just a normal Saturday night.
Right, just sort of thing you might get. I mean, I used to live in Hong Kong and I had some very funny things. Certainly had snake out there, which I quite liked, as it happens.
Lovely.
There's nothing wrong with it. It was in soup. Then the appeal of it. You see, I paid attention last year when Matt Hancock was on it, because I know him politically. And it seemed to me there was an unpleasant bullying element of it, that people really wanted to make him specifically do the most unpleasant things. And I thought that showed a sort of unpleasant underbelly to society. Did that worry you? Or when you were doing it, there wasn't such a controversial figure and it didn't really apply?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think that people will vote for the people that they don't like to, you know, to make suffer. So you kind of do know what's going on in an episode. If you get voted to do it, you probably have not had a great episode, so you know. But I just take everything like... I don't care what people think of me, to be perfectly honest with you, so I don't care.
So you had to charm the audience whilst you were there?
I definitely had to work harder, because I think, obviously, people just pigeonhole you when you've been a page 3 girl. But again, I'm up for that challenge. It wasn't a problem.
And how did it help you in your career? So you go into it in 2008, you get the publicity from it. Does that open lots of doors for you? Was it worth it in those times?
Oh, God, 100% it was worth it. It was worth it both personally and professionally. I mean, I then, you know, turned my career from being a glamour model to being able to do more reality TV and more TV rather than doing, you know, staying as a glamour model, because obviously we all get older and we can't do that. So, yeah, it was definitely worth it.
And so, do you then watch it? I mean, are you glued?
I love it.
You're glued?
Yeah, I love it.
How?
No, honestly,
tried?
I love it. I mean, obviously, we're very different. I love it. I love reality TV. I'm absolutely loving this show. I think it's brilliant. I'm obsessed with Sam Thompson. He has to win. I just love it.
Well, I hope Nigel wins for obvious reasons.
He won't.
But nothing really seemed to happen, and then they just sort of muddle about and go off. I couldn't get into what the excitement was.
Oh, I honestly love it. Like, I love watching the trials. I think it's been a really good year. I think there's a really nice group of people in there. Could be more interesting. I like the arguments in reality shows, so there isn't, you know, couple, but I just really enjoy it.
Would you like to do it again?
Oh, I don't think I'd be as good this time, but obviously if they offered it, I'd say yes.
You did,
yeah,
and you were saying you were jolly glad you did in Australia rather than in Wales when it was...
Yeah, when they did the castle, I'd have been devastated to have to do that, because you want the whole experience of going to Australia, staying in the Versace hotel. It's just all... I'm a huge fan of the show, so I've watched it from day one till now.
And it's warm in Australia, whereas in Wales it's probably quite cold.
Although when I did it, they were having the worst weather for 30 years, so we were cold and wet for days, and then it did get nice.
Right.
Part of the experience.
And it's made you a great success. And so what is your current reality TV that you're doing?
I've not done one now, but I've done loads of reality TV. So I've done Big Brother 3 times, I've done loads of reality TV, so yeah, I've been really lucky.
Did you do what's this Bush Tucker trial that Nigel's got to do today? What's that mean?
Oh, so he's got to do the trial to earn the stars, which is like the eating. I did the eating trial, so yeah, so he's got to do like a gruesome trial to win stars for camp.
For his teammates?
Yes, but he'll do it. He'll do it. He wants the airtime, doesn't he? He's been really honest about that, which I think makes him look desperate. You have to tell him that he does look really desperate.
All right, I'll tell him from you. Thank you so much for coming on. And now to conclude another competition, but not of most popular celebrities, but rather most popular dictators. Coming in third place is Turkmenistan's president, Sedar Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow, or as his friends call him, Pongo. He has a tough act to follow as president. His father, who was perhaps best known for his love of cycling and for closing all of Turkmenistan's hospitals as a means of solving the COVID pandemic. His son, Pongo, as we like to call him, achieved 73% in the vote. Coming in second place is a Russian dictator who you'll have heard of, one Vladimir Putin, who, in spite of Russia's GDP per capita being below the likes of Costa Rica and St. Lucia, as well as his illegal invasion of Ukraine, claims to hold 76.69% of all Russian votes. And finally, in first place is Kim Jong-un, who's actually had a rather difficult day, as he suffered the biggest drop in popularity over his entire 12 years in charge. It's easy to forget the full name of North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And in an election just a few days ago, the Supreme Leader's vote share fell dramatically from 100% in 2019 to 99.91%. My thoughts are with him at this most difficult time, but if he could help me with the ballot boxes in North East Somerset next year, I might be grateful. Anyway, thank you very much to Nicola. That's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's What's on the Bill of Fare tonight?
I'll be doing a Bush Tucker trial with you, Jacob. No, not really. Look, we do have an exclusive from our Home and Security editor about the level of terror threat in the run-up to Christmas. Christmas events potentially being targeted. Should we hoik it up to severe? Lee Anderson is on. He exposed the deportation crisis that's taking place. And I have got Steve Bannon, Trump's former right-hand man, for an exclusive. He kicks off on all sorts of topics, including Harry and Meghan, as well as, of course, Western culture. All that coming your way and much more.
Oh, that always sounds very interesting. Lee Anderson had a very interesting week because he was speaking in the House of Commons yesterday on migration, and his constituents fed up with it.
No, indeed.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Thursday will be another cold day. There's still some dry and sunny weather to be had, but we do also have some snow and ice warnings in force for Thursday morning. Across the northeast, we could see some snow showers continuing throughout tonight, but it's across the southwest where this area of rain will push up from the south, bumping into the colder air, bringing some snow to southern areas, mainly across the high ground of Devon and Cornwall, but we could see a dusting of snow as far east as parts of Wiltshire. So potentially some snow and ice out there tomorrow
tomorrow morning. There's also an ice risk across parts of Northern Ireland as well, and it will be a cold start. Once again, a colder start than this morning, tomorrow morning. The snow showers will continue across northeastern areas throughout Thursday. This area of rain, sleet and snow will continue to affect the far southwest as well through much of the day before it does then sink southwards into the evening. In between, though, we've got a good deal of sunshine. It will be feeling cold, though. Temperatures still only reaching 3 or 4 degrees for many areas. Some areas of Scotland sticking with a frost all day. So another very cold start to Friday. Much of that rain has now cleared the south, but we will see some patches of freezing fog around. These could be quite slow to clear throughout Friday. And elsewhere, though, a good amount of sunshine once again. A bit more sunshine to come throughout Saturday and Sunday, and the temperatures could start to rise a little in the south by the end of weekend.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures